G'day there, James here. In this video, we're going to be looking at many different topics of interest to do with money. We're also going to look at a lot of Facebook comments I've had from my latest video I posted very recently. I highly recommend you check that out as well, about a brief history of money and why Bitcoin sucks because it's centralized and insecure. This person has commented a great video. The only comment, and this is they're commenting about my previous video about a brief history of money and Bitcoin's a scam, which is the one right before this on Odyssey on YouTube. The only comment I'd have is money and currency are absolutely not the same. Money is real and more importantly, it has intrinsic value, albeit it's heavily manipulated in the markets and by the same central banking cartels. So I've responded here, money and currency are both a store of value, a medium of exchange and a unit of account. Something is only money because it has those functions and because enough people agree to trust that a physical or digital item has such value. The intrinsic value of fiat currency comes from the trust that the paper you hold has value and will be accepted as value by someone else, that it's tradable, which is true and which does happen daily and has been for centuries. Value shouldn't really be intrinsic or not, as value is subjective to the valuer. Fiat currency is still real. We use it every day and it works. Another point I want to bring up about the intrinsic value or not is if I went down, it's like if someone offered me right now a dozen eggs or an elephant, I want the dozen eggs. Why? Because that's useful to me, even though an elephant may have more intrinsic value if I was to resell it or cut it up into pieces of meat to eat or do something else with it, take it to a circus or just free it back into the wild or something. It's like, well, the dozen eggs are more useful to me right now. I don't want an elephant or a cow. Like, value is subjective to the valuer because you can't have value without a valuer. If there was no people with a conscious mind, then there would be no such thing as value. Value isn't intrinsic in reality. It is objective and subjective. Subjective to personal views, like I might value that dozen eggs more than an elephant, but you may value the elephant more than the dozen eggs. Things become objective when it's like $50 is $50 and that will buy you $50 worth of stuff. That's objective now. So I hope that makes sense. I might need to elaborate a little bit more on that to really deeply clarify what's happening here. So fiat currency is still real. We use it every day and it works. Gold as a store of value typically is better than fiat currency. As a store of value over time, it tends to increase, which could even be debatable if that's a good or a bad thing, because you may actually say that gold increasing in value over time is a really, really bad thing, as I said earlier, because the bad guys hold most of it, which means that over time it's becoming more and more valuable, and value is a means to be able to influence people and to use power as a medium of exchange. And again, you can buy thugs with that. So perhaps gold rising in price is a terrible, really bad thing, actually, when you really think about it. If it just held its value at, what was it, like hundreds of years ago, I think, oh no, not even hundreds of years ago, like in 1933 when they confiscated all the gold, it was only $20 or $35 per ounce, I believe. So gold as a medium of exchange is nowhere near as good as fiat currency. Gold as a unit of account is via weight, whereas, hold on, I want to touch on this more. As a medium of exchange, it is nowhere near as good as fiat currency. I'll explain a little bit because we already did a lot of that explaining earlier. Notes and digital currency is very easy to transact for small, medium and large scale things. Gold, it's not very liquid, it's not very well accepted. Like you have to then transfer it into a usable money to be able to use. Okay, we get that. Gold as a unit of account is via weight, whereas fiat currency is via the face value of notes and via the valuation of that currency in comparison to all the rest. Yes. Money is essentially the conceptualization of those three functions plus the characteristics of durability, portability, fungibility, acceptability, divisibility, scarcity, and non-counterfeit ability. Oh, I said that right. Hopefully by this point you're able to explain to your friend, your child, your parent what each of those characteristics of money are and those three functions as well. A money or currency, same thing, must meet these functions and characteristics. Otherwise, it is a bad money or currency. I guess you could say money is just the overall idea of those functions and characteristics. That's what money is. And then everything else is a currency. Gold, silver, fiat, Bitcoin, crypto, they're all just currencies. You could say that. You could say that. If you can see other distinctions between money and currency, please point them out. That's what I asked, and let's see if they did. So this was that person in the same comment thread. This was their answer to me asking if they could point out distinctions between money and currency, and they said money is fungible, currency is not. It deflated to zero time and time again. They mean fiat currency. Mike Maloney, very early stuff has some great info. They're saying Mike Maloney has good information on this, which he does. Yeah, but a lot of it is inaccurate. And so I replied, well, fungibility means that every unit token shares the same value. All 100 AUD notes are worth the same. Same with all fiat. 1 gram of the same type of gold is worth the same as all other 1 grams of gold. Cows or apples as a currency are not fungible, as some cows or apples are better than others and some worse. Sounds like your meaning is a store of value. Yes, most currency do end up depreciating their value over time. This most likely will be the same with gold and silver. Hopefully that's what happens and it does depreciate, but just over a long time period. Hopefully gold and silver, I do say that again here. Hopefully gold and silver do lose their value over time, as history has shown us they are not good forms of money, as they are too easily manipulated, hoarded, and have a poor ability to be used as a medium of exchange due to lack of portability. So they've replied and they said, that's why I qualified my comment with, albeit heavily manipulated. And then they go on to say, a bag of salt has more value than the currency equivalent of it at any given time. Without market manipulation, that salt has intrinsic value tomorrow. Yesterday's bills are worth less today and will be worth less tomorrow, and so on. So I replied and I said, a bag of salt may have value, but not sure what you mean it has more value than a currency equivalent. I don't really know what they mean there. You may be able to understand that. And I said, salt isn't very liquid. You can't go to the supermarket and buy eggs and bread with a bag of salt, but you can with cash or digital fiat. Salt is only valuable to someone who is willing to trade for it or to buy it. You first need a buyer to exchange the salt for a more accepted form of currency or money, like AUD. Then you have a form of liquidity, which is liquidity meaning exchangeable currency or value, which is much more usable than a bag of salt. In this way, fiat currency has a higher intrinsic value than a bag of salt because it's more convenient and acceptable as a medium of exchange. Another reason why fiat actually does have intrinsic value and not just instrumental is because it is good for paying taxes. Obviously, yes, taxes are theft, but it still gives it more value. You can't pay taxes with salt. You need fiat, which makes the fiat valuable. And sure, salt does have value, obviously, but it's subjective value, whereas fiat has objective value. Only some people in a geographical area want your salt, or want salt at all. Although everyone in an area wants your fiat, wants your usable money, better quality money. Higher acceptability equals higher value. Yes, fiat does depreciate with inflation. Salt can also rise and fall in value according to supply, demand, and the quality. This is a different comment threaded with someone else, and so thank you for that previous person for allowing me to have such an entertaining, informative, and peaceful discussion. Could even say argument, because to have arguments isn't a bad thing if they're respectful. You don't have to be disagreeable to disagree, and that's what's happening here, so highly respect everyone who's commented. The next one is, someone is saying, in comparison to Bitcoin, could wake up tomorrow and all gone. My $50 note cannot be hacked with cash. And so I said, well, with digital it is possible to hack it. With cash, though, you can lose it, it can be burnt or damaged, it can be stolen, there's a whole host of things. There's always a host of issues, no matter if it's physical or digital. And so one of the commenters here has said something about the internet. I can exchange notes or even silver for goods and services without the internet. So I said, the internet works 99.9% of the time, fortunately. If it was deliberately attacked to stop an up-and-coming digital currency, well, it's going to be highly unlikely that the whole internet just goes off. It's just very unlikely. If it was, that's why it's also a good idea to have a currency that can be sent offline via Bluetooth, NFC, or a Wi-Fi network. Because you can send things over a Wi-Fi network without that Wi-Fi being connected to the internet. And I think this is possible to do, though I'm not entirely sure, but that's an idea I've got with my Freedom Credit, to be able to do that. But there's a whole host of other technical issues that come with that. So this next person has commented, we could create the Canna coin, hemp paper like fiat with service-backed hours, 20, 30, etc. If all farmers grew it and created this currency, it would be decentralized. This is a snapshot of years in the making. So if all farmers grew it, you know what's going to happen? It's just like when they used tobacco as a currency. Vigilante groups would go around and burn the tobacco fields. Why? Because there was too much. It was causing inflation. They needed to deflate the supply so that the currency of tobacco could maintain its value. This is the exact same thing that would happen here. Plus, I also say here in response, I give reasons why a paper currency is too vulnerable and ineffective as a currency in today's world. And I share that in the previous video, in this one. Again, it's vulnerable because it can be counterfeited and the printing places can be physically stopped quite easily, easier than a digital place. And even if it was equally easy or equal difficulty to stop a physical place compared to a digital place, there's a lot less likelihood of having blood and violence if a group of bad guys are stopping a digital method of constructing a currency compared to a physical. So that's also another vulnerability and downside of making a physical. And it's just imagine how difficult it would be to have a paper currency, because you need a currency that's not just locally to a small geographical area. We want one that's worldwide, because that's the only way we'd ever have an impact of changing the world is with a worldwide currency, not for a small currency, even for a large country just like Australia. No, it needs to be bigger than that. It needs to be such a good idea that it can deal with the world. In a way, Bitcoin has that ability because of its digital nature, etc. And also the hour method as a value of currency is just no good, as some people's time is worth far more than others. So they've replied and said, at the moment, a lawyer is getting $750 an hour to con us, and the cleaner is getting $30 to evolve us. The lawyer would have the opinion that his time is more valuable when it's not. We need a complete reset outside of digital currency. The value of time is equal amongst us all. Someone has commented, there is another way of looking at that. Time is life and all life is equally valuable. You may be an engineer, but is your life more valuable than a janitor's? It's the way we see things. However, there are duties that require courage and extra effort, such as people who defuse bombs. We can still negotiate, as we cannot be absolute. But overall, our time is equally important, and this is a consciousness we must take on if we want to change this paradigm. So I said in reply to the previous comment, the lawyer sure is conning you, but it doesn't make sense to say that a cleaner is helping you to evolve. They are cleaning your home, and their time is only worth what people will pay them. If you want a personal trainer, an amateur who just got their certificate, they're worth only $50 an hour. Compared to a professional that trains Mr. Olympia competitors, they will be worth $500 an hour, if not more, maybe $5,000 an hour. Why? Because they are worth the difference. There's a huge, vast difference in their knowledge and their experience, their skill, their expertise. The same is said of business coaches, masseuses, barbers. 1 hour of cleaning is nowhere near as valuable as 1 hour of heart surgery or anything else useful. Anyone can clean. Anyone can do it for an hour as long as you're not physically disabled. It's not a difficult skill to learn, though in some parts of the world it seems to be. Egypt. Anyone can clean for an hour. Very few can perform heart surgery safely. Because anyone can perform heart surgery, but not many people could do it safely. Everyone's right to life is equal, barring those who do evil. But not everyone's time is worth the same, which is natural and there's no problem with that. And I do clarify this point a bit later on. Here, currency does not need a tangible physical component. This is an unnecessary limitation of a money. We've had millennia of physical money and evidence, experience with this, and we can see how well that's gone. Thus, the reason for making these videos. Of course, money, whether physical or digital, must be private to be a good money. Only the buyer and seller should be privy to the transaction. Unfortunately, not all life is equal. Would you say that your life is equal to Daniel Andrews? No, I don't think you would. Or Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or the Queen or the Pope. Typically, an engineer's life is more valuable than a janitor, as they offer a higher value to society and it's a more complex role. This does not mean they have the right to violate anyone else's rights as what is objectively equal as everyone's rights. And a caveat with that point, that's getting into difficult grounds there to value someone's life, whether it's an engineer or a janitor. Sure, the engineer may offer more value to society, but does that mean their life is more valuable? Say in the case with evil people, it's very easy to say that a good person's life is more valuable than someone who's evil, objectively, because the evil person is a contradicting hypocrite. Because they live a life that is in total violation of the principles that they would want respected of themselves, such as the golden rule of equity, to treat others as you wish to be treated. So therefore, they have abdicated reality in favor of subjective fantasy to create a fantasy world, which means they're forfeiting their right to have their life, essentially. Consciousness is merely awareness of self. The goal is to align that consciousness with objective external reality. There is no equality of opportunity, of life, of time, of value, or of outcome. There is only equality of rights. This is the philosophy of morality. Think about that. Opportunity. How are you ever going to have equality of opportunity? You can't. If you've got my boot camp in Victoria in Australia, but someone lives in Ghana in Africa, they haven't got the opportunity to come to my boot camp if they're living in Ghana and haven't got enough money to pay for a ticket to come over to my boot camp. Like, that's a simple example. You can't have equality of opportunity, which is a common topic that people talk about. And you can't have equality of outcome. If I have 10 people I want to join my team at my boot camp center and I only need one of them and I interview all of them, how can there be an equality of outcome? That would mean that all of them get hired when I only need one of them and can only afford one. I'm obviously going to pick the person that is best for me and my business. You can't have equality of outcome. It's silly. There is no equality of life because some people are more important, more valuable, more worthy of life than others through their deeds, their character, who they are, their morality. That's an objective fact. Same with their time. Some people's time is just worth more. Just because someone's a barber and someone is a philosopher, it doesn't mean that the barber's a bad person. Obviously not. That's ridiculous to even contemplate that. They're still performing a value, and people aren't defined by their work, their career. They can have a big impact on who they are as a character, but that's not everything. There's a lot more to a person than just the work or contribution they provide to the rest of society. There's a lot more than that. So the next comment thread, someone has commented here saying commodity-backed crypto is where it's at. And so I've replied and I said, commodity backing is an old and outdated idea. Commodity being something physical, which I explain right here. A currency doesn't need to be backed by anything physical, which Bitcoin and other cryptos prove, which is a good thing. What gives Bitcoin its value is because of its protocol, because of the value of its idea. Now, in reality, people don't actually understand the system and thus are mistaken, but the principle remains the same. Have a good idea, a good protocol, that's where the value comes from. Introducing a necessity to have physical reserves and backing just adds a totally unnecessary layer of complexity and vulnerability. Scarcity can much more easily be attained in a currency, by limiting the amount available. Also another good aspect of Bitcoin with a 21 million cap, because a lot of the time people who are advocates of commodity-backed crypto say it's because of scarcity, so that will limit the amount of supply, thus making it a more stable currency, less susceptible to inflation and devaluation. But scarcity is much more easily achievable, as I just said. It's a huge vulnerability, as we've seen in the past. The bad guys easily hoard or confiscate said commodity. Or Executive Order 6102. Bye-bye gold, 1933. Franklin Roosevelt, if you remember from the previous video. It's much more difficult to exploit a well-designed protocol, thus increasing security dramatically in comparison to any currency which requires a commodity backing. This is why the Continentals and Greenbacks were the best currency, because they had no backing, and that's also why England did everything in their power to destroy them and move the Americans onto gold and silver backed system, because it's just so much easier to control them. In summary, having a commodity to back a digital currency is defeating the purpose. Yeah, it's just a contradiction. It's like, what? Why would you do that? Defeating the purpose. Like, we've got this digital thing which is really good and works well in of itself for a single purpose, which a money really should be, just a single purpose thing as a medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. That's all it should be, to help with the division of labor, which increases everyone's quality of life. To have something like that and then say, we have this really good idea, now let's back it by, let's limit it and restrict it by some kind of physical thing that we need to have. No, it defeats the purpose. But I can understand the mentality, because again, this money thing is a very high level abstract thing to understand. There's so many layers of complexity you have to go through. So someone else has commented and said, Bitcoin is still 100 times better than the dollar. So I've said, not really. When I want to buy lingerie from you, wink wink, nudge nudge, if I use my bank account, only me, you and the bank knows. If I use Bitcoin, the whole world can know. It's on a public ledger now. The public factor of Bitcoin is deliberate surveillance and is not good for the good guys. It's only good for the bad guys. Comparing Bitcoin to dollars is like comparing the Pope to the Queen. They both suck. And he's replied, it is a transparent blockchain. Hence use Monero if you don't want anyone to know anything about your transactions. Well, you should just use Monero in the first place, though I think there's still other limitations. But when it comes to the crypto space, Monero seems to be the best cryptocurrency I've come across, but I still don't like its blockchain centralizing protocol. I think a currency should be direct peer-to-peer, and that's going to require different technology, different ideas, how to implement that without a middleman of a blockchain. It needs to be a different system, which is yet to be thought of. I mean, I've got some basic ideas, but really technically thought of and built. So I've said, yes, transparent, meaning public. This is a very, very bad thing. This is broadcasting to the bad guys where, when, and who you send your money to. The amount of damage they can do with that info is almost incomprehensible. Don't even start to think about it. Monero is much more private, and thus privacy equals security, but the topic of the day is Bitcoin. We're talking about Bitcoin in this post. Having transactions public is a huge vulnerability and opening for attack by amateur or professional attackers alike. Public basically means very little security, whereas private greatly increases security. The less anyone knows about you and your account, the more secure you will be. If let's just say you're going to do a deal for drugs, right? And you're going to use cash and you don't tell anyone but the drug dealer, and you go there and you buy the drugs. Like, which one's more likely to have the really bad guys, the feds, come and bust you? That first example, or a second one, if I'm messaging that drug dealer on Facebook Messenger, and then I go and I get there and I pay using Bitcoin. Like, which one is going to get the feds busting me? Obviously the second one compared to the first one. So the more private, I mean, drug dealing is probably not the best example to use here, but you could use steel, wool, hay, tractors, cars, weapons, fake teeth, phones, web cameras, laptops, anything in that example. Private is always better. Always better. So someone's commented and they actually said, they repeated what Dan Pena said. If you knew who created Bitcoin, you'd want nothing to do with it. And that's true. I remember Dan Pena saying that. Dan Pena's an Irish guy. I'm pretty sure he's Irish, and apparently he's a billionaire. But he doesn't seem to be part of the cabal, or not heavily at least. Because the way he said that in that video, it sounded like he had insider knowledge that only the cabal would have. But he was saying it to the general public in a general public video. So there's something going on there. But just because someone says something doesn't mean much. But it means something at least. But again, look at the facts. So someone's commented here and said, glad you've wised up, mate. The sad thing is Bitcoin could have been a decentralized, freedom-fueled option, but it's been hijacked or was in the wrong hands to begin with, maybe. And so I said, well, Bitcoin could never have been a good option, thus the post and video explanation of its root flaws. It has nothing to do with hijacking, but to do with its initial design. So someone else has commented and said, I see why you may think that but you're actually completely incorrect. The emergence of Bitcoin Cash is already a clear example on why you're incorrect. Okay, doesn't really say much, but that's why Pauline Hanson says, please explain. So, they've replied and continued. If there is a disagreement within the Bitcoin community, it will create a fork, which means the blockchain will split into two. One being the original and the other being the new rules that others are in favor of, meaning if, let's say, BlackRock, a big group of bad guys, decided to do what's called the 51% attack. So he's just repeating what the mainstream media has classified the 51% control of the mining network as a 51% attack. It will fail because the price of Bitcoin would plummet in price, so they would lose a lot of their money. If they had 51% and wanted to alter the blockchain, there'd be a lot of pushback, which would create a fork. So then you'll be left with OG, original Bitcoin, which would still be worth a particular amount. So forks happen all the time in software. I use Linux, and there's how many forks of Linux are there? I don't know, hundreds if not thousands. Forks are just where you have open source software in the beginning, and then there's a fork where one group wants to make the software like this, one group wants to make the software like this. So just to elaborate what he said here, so then you'll be left with OG Bitcoin, which would still be used, and then there would be centralized Bitcoin, which would quickly suffer from my point A. A fork has occurred in Bitcoin before. That's where Bitcoin Cash comes from. The reason there was disagreement is because Bitcoin Cash produces larger blocks to upscale transactions, but needs more proof of work, which needs more computing power, which then favors large-scale operations, which can then favor institutions, which leads to a risk of centralization. Yes, exactly. That's right. There is a clear example of Bitcoin remaining integral to true decentralization. That right there is a clear example of Bitcoin remaining No, there is absolutely zero decentralization of Bitcoin. I don't know why that example there proved it, because it didn't prove anything. It just said there was a fork where Bitcoin Cash wanted to essentially become more efficient, but it needs proof of work. Well, normal Bitcoin still use proof of work. Some of the newer currencies use proof of stake, which is, some would argue, an even worse system than proof of work, but they both have their really negative impacts. Neither are good systems, proof of work, proof of stake, and I think there's another new one as well. They're all centralizing, so they're all not good systems, because it's based upon the idea that you need a blockchain, a centralized protocol, to be able to make transactions peer-to-peer, when it should just be my phone to your phone. Boom, sends a signal, updates on your system, updates on my system. Doesn't need to be a centralized protocol somewhere else that other people need to verify. It just happens because we have private and public keys, and you go into all that technical jargon. Understand, I'm not saying Bitcoin can't be manipulated. Centralizing Bitcoin and manipulating Bitcoin are two different topics. What I've replied with is, anyone controlling the network doesn't need to attack the entire network at the same time, and they don't even need to attack it. It's like, because they own it already, then why would they attack it? You don't attack the things that you own and control in totality. It's the wrong word. It's the word that the mainstream uses to dissuade people from looking at the facts. Why would they? They can just individually blacklist users' addresses they don't like and not confirm their transactions from sending, effectively rendering dissidents unable to spend their Bitcoin. And I mean here by a dissident as someone that disagrees with totalitarian dictatorship. So if we all move to Bitcoin, the cabal watches my video, they don't like me, they just go, oh, Bitcoin's the money of the whole world, we don't like James, block. Who's going to know? No one would notice or know, except for the small group who listened to the person who had been blacklisted. If I get blacklisted, I tell you, 100 people know. 200 people, however many people watch my videos. Not many. Unfortunately, this would have too little impact for enough people to hear about it. And if people do find out, they can very easily say they only blacklisted that person because they were a terrorist, a drug dealer, an inciter, a liar, a troublemaker, what's another one? I don't know, conspiracy theorist, yeah. If it's not 100% system, it's no good. Anything less is unacceptable and an unnecessarily vulnerable system. So any system that requires less than 100% of control, like if we have the freedom credit working, if an enemy was to try and take over, to block transactions, to stop the network, etc., right? They'd need to get control of 100% of everything that's using that, which means it'd be next to impossible because everyone can just have a second phone that's dug underground in the forest and that works, you know, and they go check it every couple of days and charge it up, whatever, and no one else knows about it. Until the cabal had control of all the billions of different individual networks or devices in that network, then they couldn't control it. Anything less than that is just a bad system. Okay, we're back to the beginning. That's enough. I'm tired now. I've been talking for far too long here. I really do hope you've got some value from this, and I'm sure you disagree with many things in here, which is perfectly fine. That's a good thing. Being challenged is great because it helps you to understand what you know to a greater degree. It helps me do the same thing. And then it allows essentially like a dialectic process to happen, back and forwards, people challenging each other and saying, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, I'm wrong. And then, okay, hold on, let's have a look at the facts. Have you considered this fact? Oh, no, shit, I didn't consider that fact. Oh, you're right there. Okay, I changed my opinion. Boom, that's better. I was wrong there. That's right, that's better. I move this way. That's what we have to do. Overcome the ego, and the ego in this specific context really just means arrogance and fear of being shamed, right? Totally overcome that, become confident in yourself because you have a high level of self-esteem, because you trust your mind and you trust reason and you don't believe stupid nonsense. Hope you've enjoyed it. Bye-bye.